In section 4.2, we're looking at congruence in triangles. We're talking about what makes figures congruent, especially triangles today. And the definition of congruent figures. For figures to really be congruent, you need a lot, actually. You need to have the exact same size and shape, which really means that all of the corresponding parts, whether you're talking about every corresponding side, and by corresponding we mean like matching up. So every side that matches up in the two needs to be congruent. Every angle that matches up between the two needs to be congruent. So all of these corresponding parts need to be congruent. So if you think about a triangle, for triangles to be congruent, you need all three corresponding angles to match up, and you need all three corresponding sides to match up. That's 6 different pieces of info that you need. And if we know figures are congruent, you can write a congruent statement. It's used to say that these two figures really are congruent. When we're talking about polygons, we want to use the corresponding vertices. We need to make sure that they match up. And you're going to list those vertices in the same order. So if you said that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, okay, we're talking about triangles in this case. It could be any polygons, and if we're talking about like quadrilaterals or pentagons or anything more than triangles, you don't really need the symbol like I do for triangle. But make sure your vertices are in the same spots. This means that angle A must be congruent to angle D because they're the first letters, and angle C must be congruent to angle F because they're the last letters. And if you talked about side AB, it must be congruent to side DF. So all the corresponding parts need to be in the same order, and that's really important with congruent statements. And sometimes these congruent statements can help you decipher things about a picture too, and we'll see that in the examples. So here I want to draw and completely mark an example of quadrilateral, ABCD, congruent to quadrilateral, WXYZ. Here's our congruent statement. It says that two polygons are congruent. We're talking about quadrilaterals, which means four-sided. So I have to draw and completely mark this example. I'm going to start with quadrilateral ABCD. Now I can cheat a little bit because I have the computer to help me do this. What I'm going to do is just group these all. And I'm going to copy and paste. And I could leave them like this, but that would be rather boring. I know even if I rotate, those things are still congruent, right? I haven't changed the congruency. I could even take this and flip it left and right. These figures are still congruent. Even though I flipped and I rotated and I did all that, they're still congruent figures. The only thing that would make them not congruent is if I grab this and now make things larger or smaller. I'm going to undo what I just did to get it back to normal. Okay. Let's leave it like this so it makes it a little bit trickier for me to try to label these things. Actually, I'll rotate a little bit, make it easier to label. Okay. So, quadrilateral ABCD. Now I can label this in any order. Let's say that I do ABCD this way. I have to be really careful now about where I put W, X, Y, and Z. This vertex A better match up with W. They were the first ones listed. So A was here, and I believe the one that matches up there would be here. So that gets W. Now B, second letter, has to match up with X because that was the second letter. So I'm guessing I go this way. And it should, W, X, Y, Z, continue this way, around. And let's see, A, B, C, and D. Yeah, C to D is the shortest side. Y to Z is the shortest side. But I was saying completely mark this example too. We also said that, with with congruent figures, we have all sides congruent, all angles congruent that correspond. So I need to mark those things. So I'm going to mark side AB congruent to side WX. And side BC, getting 2 tick marks, congruent to XY. The shortest side gets 3 tick marks, and the longest side gets 4, or I can do like Roman numerals, IV. Okay. Oh, and all the angles that correspond are congruent. Angle A, congruent to, corresponds with angle W. Angle B, getting 2 arcs, corresponds with angle X. Angle C, getting 3 arcs, corresponds to angle Y. This looks like the most obtuse angle. Oh, another thing I can do with angles, like instead of doing 4 arcs, which would get a little crazy, I can do 1 arc with 1 tick mark. And that's different then. And D and Z match up. So now I've completely marked these examples of these quadrilaterals being congruent. Again, it means all corresponding angles are congruent, all corresponding sides are congruent. And even if I flipped, rotated, that's fine, as long as I don't grab a corner and drag the shape larger or smaller. Alright. Another thing you should be able to do is write a congruence statement. Remember, a congruence statement says that two things are congruent. And then I have to identify all the pairs of congruent corresponding parts. And we know that the corresponding parts that are going to be congruent are the three sides and the three angles. So I'm going to list all of those. First of all, my congruence statement needs to be listed in the correct order. So I can start with this first triangle and name however I want. Maybe I do GHF. Triangle GHF is congruent to triangle. Now this one, I definitely cannot just do whatever I want. I'm going to have to match up and correspond the way I did this one. Now if I did GHF, notice I did first the angle with one arc, then two arcs, then three arcs. I'm going to have to do the same over here. So one arc, two arcs, three arcs. TRS would be the correct way to list that one. And let's check it out. This one I did GHF. I did the one tick mark side and the two tick mark side. One tick mark side, two tick mark side. So we're good to go. There's my congruence statement. Now let's list all of the pairs of congruent corresponding parts. And there's going to be three congruent sides and three congruent angles. So maybe I'll start with side GH. And it's a line segment, is congruent to GH, first two letters. I can use a picture or I can use my congruence statement. It should be congruent to TR. And it is. That's the other one with one tick mark. Maybe I'll do side HF second. Again, I can use the picture and note the two tick marks and go here and note the two tick marks, which is RS. Or I could look here and be like HF, RS. My last side, I could just look at the statement and do GF. That side I have not done yet, corresponds to TS. I did the first and last letters there. So I've listed the corresponding sides, but I also need the corresponding angles. And I know that angle G is congruent to angle T. They're both listed first or both with one arc. Angle H is congruent to angle R. And angle F is congruent to angle S. Again, either looking at the picture or at the statement, and these things are in the same spots. So I mentioned earlier we have 6 congruent corresponding parts for triangles because we have 3 angles, 3 sides. Again, make sure that congruence statement is written in the correct order and everything matches up. That's really important. Alright. Oh, you notice we are given a congruence statement right up here. I know that ABCD is congruent to FGHK. I can always reference this if I need to look back and find what matches up, because I notice we must have a rotation, it looks like, of this shape. But I know that A matches up with F, so angle A and angle F are congruent. Angle B matches up with G, so B and G are congruent, etc. Find X and Y. Okay. Where is X even at? Oh, look. Angle K has X and Y in it. I am going to wait on this one, because I noticed this side only has X in it. So once I have X, I can plug that in and hopefully figure out Y. So I'm going to look at this side here with X. This is inches. So this side is 3x minus 6 inches. Now what side is this? FG. I need to know if that corresponds. There's 2 sides given over here, 9 or 12. It must be one of those. But FG, that's the first 2 letters listed here. That's the side. So that must correspond to side AB, the first 2 letters here. And side AB was 9 inches. So I know that 3x minus 6 has to equal 9 inches. And I'll get x alone. Add 6 on both sides. 9 plus 6 is 15. Divide by 3. And x is 5. Alright. So I've got x. Ooh, and now that x is 5, I can kind of figure out what this is. This would be 4 times 5, right? So this is actually 20 plus 2y. And then I can figure out y. I know that angle K, I have 3 angles given over here, so I gotta be careful which angle is the same as angle K or congruent to angle K. K was the last letter, so angle K is congruent to angle D, which here is 44 degrees. So now I know that angle K, which was 20 plus 2y, has to equal 44 degrees. Those angles were congruent. Solve for y, subtract 20. 2y equals 24. Divide by 2, and y equals 12. And we're good to go. Alright, so use that congruence statement to help you find what matches up if need be. And another example here. Let's explain why these two shapes are congruent. Okay, remember, you need all congruent sides, you need all congruent angles that correspond. So let's see if we have all that. Oh, when we're talking about two shapes, we're talking about, this would be one of the shapes here. And then the other shape, let's do a different highlight color. The other shape would be right here. Okay, so we're trying to see, are those really congruent? We need all sides congruent, all angles congruent. Well, if you look at this shape, we have a side with 1 tick mark. This shape, side with 1 tick mark. 3 tick marks, 3 tick marks, 2 tick marks, 2 tick marks. The last side, where is it? Well, this last side is shared, right? Anything is congruent to itself by reflexive property. Remember that property that says anything is congruent or equal to itself? So for here, all sides are congruent, check. Okay? And I know that because 3 are marked. Like we had tick marks already marking those congruent. And that one side, JK, was shared. And I put that 4 mark, IV, Roman numerals there. 1 is shared, and that's reflexive property of congruency here. So all sides are congruent. Are all angles congruent? Well, I notice I have 2 right angles in A and D. I have 2 right angles in B and C, and that's awesome. Well, what about these angles? I need angle 2 to be congruent to angle 4 and angle 1 to be congruent to angle 3. Wait a second, did you notice these parallel lines? We have the arrows here, so if these lines are parallel, I do have some congruent angles. Angles 1 and 3 would have to be congruent because I have that Z shape. What kind of angles are those off of those parallel lines? Remember, parallel lines always gives us information about angles. Those are alternate interior angles. And what about angles 2 and 4? Make that Z shape again. They're between the parallel lines on opposite sides, alternate interior angles. So I do know that all angles are congruent. Check. The reason why 2 are marked. Actually, they were right angles. 2 are marked congruent because of the right angles. And then we have alternate interior angles for 2 pairs. And so I can do a congruent statement. So if I said, actually I'll start with A, ADKJ is congruent to, I went ADKJ, now A to D and then to K I went on 3 tick marks and then 2 tick marks. Let's make sure I do that here. 3 tick marks, 2 tick marks. So I'm going to have to do C, B, J, K. Notice I was very careful about how I listed that. It's real important that you have the order correct when you're doing your congruence statement. Alright, next example. Why are these 2, in this case, triangles congruent? So I'm looking at this triangle here compared to this triangle here. Why are they congruent? Well, again, ask yourself 2 things. Are all the sides congruent? 1 tick mark, 1 tick mark, 2 tick marks, 2 tick marks, 3 tick marks, 3 tick marks. Yes. And the reason why, they're all marked congruent. That was easy. Then the next question, are all the angles congruent? Wow, I don't have any angles marked congruent, so I must have a lot of work cut out for me. Well, wait a second. What kind of angles are these when they're opposite from each other when 2 lines cross, and aren't they congruent? First of all, these are vertical angles. So those are congruent. Vertical angles congruent. And then, look at this. The arrows mean parallel lines. I'm going to have those special angle pairs again, because parallel lines always give us information about angles. If I look at angle P, and I continue that Z shape there, with these two parallel lines, I'm looking between the lines on opposite sides. Those are alternate interior angles. Angle S, I'm going to do 2 arcs because it's congruent to angle Q, 2 arcs. Again, alternate interior angles. And I know alternate interior angles off of parallel lines are congruent. So all angles are congruent. Yes, I have all 3 angle pairs congruent. And then I would say that triangle, if I did PST, is congruent to triangle. PST. I did, oh, you know what? I already did 1 arc here, so I'm going to do 1 arc with a tick mark there. Sorry about that. I listed this triangle as PST. P to S to D, I did the 1 tick mark side and the 3 tick mark side. So then I would have to do 1 tick mark, 3 tick mark. So RQT. Again, making sure we write those congruent statements in the correct order. Today we're talking a lot about congruent figures and making sure we have all corresponding sides congruent and all corresponding angles congruent before you can say that the figures themselves are congruent.